You made the final payment. The balance hit zero. After all the years, the monthly transfers, the statements, the slow and quiet erosion of a number that once felt impossible to reduce, it was done. The house was yours, no lender's name on the deed anymore, no payment due on the 1st of next month. Just the house, the title, and a life that was supposed to feel different now. You sat with it for a moment, and it didn't feel the way you thought it would. Hello, I'm Lincoln, and most people think paying off a house gives them freedom. But what it actually gives them is something very different. And understanding what that is, what actually changes and what doesn't, what gets heavier instead of lighter, is one of the more honest conversations about homeownership that almost never gets had. For most people who own a mortgage, the paid-off house lives in the imagination as a destination, not a vague one, a specific one. You've pictured it, the morning when the last payment processes and the account is lighter, but not in the way that means something is owed. The shift from being obligated to being positioned. The particular feeling of owning something so completely that no external entity has a claim on it, that the foundation of your financial life is entirely yours. This image has been with you since the day you signed, maybe longer. It was part key of how you justified the purchase, part of how you absorbed the difficult months, part of what made the commitment feel like the right kind of commitment. The mortgage was a means, the paid-off house was the end. And the end was supposed to feel like arrival. So when the balance hit zero, there's a specific quality to the moment. A quality of confirmation, of completion, of having done the thing you set out to do decades ago. The culture endorses this feeling. Your parents probably held it. The financial conversation around homeownership tends to frame the paid-off house as a milestone so significant that it justifies much of what came before, what you expected to feel when the balance hit zero and what you actually feel. Those two things are often not the same. Here is what actually changes. The monthly payment disappears. That's real and significant. The cash flow that was going toward the mortgage is now available for other things, and the monthly financial picture genuinely looks different. For people who planned carefully and built their lives around this moment, the freed cash flow is meaningful and provides real flexibility in how the month operates. But the house itself doesn't change. It continues to require what it has always required: the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance that houses at every stage of ownership demand. The ongoing financial commitment of owning a physical asset of this size doesn't end with the mortgage. It shifts form. The large, fixed monthly obligation becomes a set of smaller, irregular ones that are easier to ignore until they're urgent. And urgency, when it arrives in the form of a failing roof or an HVAC system at the end of its life, is expensive. None of this is a reason not to pay off the house. It's an accurate description of what paying it off actually means. The obligation didn't disappear. It changed shape. And here is the more interesting part, the part that almost nobody talks about. When the mortgage disappears, what doesn't disappear is the emotional weight of owning something that is now entirely yours. The thing that was partially yours, partially the bank's, is now entirely yours, and that shift from partial ownership to complete ownership changes subtly how you hold the asset, how much its loss would mean, how much energy goes toward protecting it. What did you think would feel lighter once the payment stopped? Let me draw a picture of what happens at this moment. Imagine the house in the center. Around it, when the mortgage existed, was a structure, the lender's interest, the payment, the obligation. That structure was constraining. You had to sustain it, work around it, plan your financial life in relation to it. Now the structure is gone. The house stands alone in the center. And what most people expect to happen is that removal of the structure creates open space, freedom to move, to decide, to use. The position the house represents as a foundation for the next chapter. What actually tends to happen is different. The house in the center doesn't create open space. It creates a gravitational pull, an asset that is entirely yours, with no external obligation attached to it, becomes, for many people, something they organize their remaining decisions around protecting. The house becomes the thing at the center of the life, and things at the center of lives exert pull in all directions, drawing decisions toward preservation rather than toward movement. This is the trap that no one names, not the mortgage, the absence of it, the paid-off house sitting in the center of your financial picture with its full weight and its full value and its full capacity to be lost, quietly reshapes the range of risks you're willing to take. The mortgage, paradoxically, distributed some of that weight. When the bank had a stake in the asset felt less singularly yours to protect. You were stewarding something that was partially someone else's. Now it's entirely yours, and entirely yours means entirely your responsibility to preserve, which means the cost of losing. It has become entirely personal in a way it wasn't when an institution shared the risk with you. The freedom from the mortgage is also, quietly, the assumption of the full emotional weight of what the asset is worth. Here is a story. Her name is Margaret. She paid off her house at 61, earlier than projected, through a combination of disciplined, extra payments and a market that had been generous. It was a genuine achievement. She sat with the final statement for a long time. In the months after, she noticed something she hadn't anticipated. Where she expected freedom, she found caution. Not the caution of obligation. The obligation was gone. A different kind. The caution of someone who has something to lose. A relocation opportunity arrived. A role in a different city, professionally interesting, financially meaningful. Before the house was paid off, she'd have evaluated it seriously. Now the evaluation ran differently. Selling the house meant selling the asset that was entirely hers. Moving meant leaving the place she'd paid into for 23 years. The logic of the opportunity was clear. The logic of staying was emotional and property-based and not fully articulable, but it was there every time she tried to make the decision. She stayed. The opportunity went to someone else. She doesn't describe this as a mistake. The house is still hers. The city still has things she values. The life she's living is genuinely good. But she understands now that the paid-off house didn't free her to make the decision she would have, made from a position of genuine openness. It weighted the decision, subtly, without announcing itself. There's a specific quality to the weighing that she can describe now from the distance of a few years. It wasn't that she couldn't see the merits of the opportunity. She could. It was that every time she tried to seriously evaluate it, the evaluation included the house in a way she hadn't expected, the house she didn't have to sell, the house she could stay in, the house that was entirely hers and that staying kept it being. The rational case for the move was clear. The emotional case for staying was the paid-off house, standing in the center of the picture, anchoring her to the familiar in a way that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with what complete ownership had done to her sense of risk. You don't say this part out loud, but you feel it before the conversation is over. Now a different version. His name is Robert. He paid off his house around the same time as Margaret. Similar position, similar sense of completion, similar moment of sitting with the final statement and trying to locate what he expected to feel. He made a specific decision about what the paid-off house meant. It meant he had an anchor, not a gravitational pull, but a genuine foundation, something solid enough to stand on while he moved. The house was his, and it would stay his unless he chose to sell it. And the choosing was the point. From a position of owned equity and no mortgage, He could take a calculated, professional risk that wouldn't have been survivable inside a monthly payment structure. He did. He took a year to build something. On the side, not abandoning his primary income, but directing significant energy and some of the freed cash flow toward a project that required patience and had real uncertainty. The house was the thing that made the patience possible. Not because he planned to use the equity, but because the absence of the monthly obligation created enough room in his financial life that the uncertainty of the project wasn't a structural threat. The project worked eventually, not dramatically. It became a meaningful secondary income stream rather than a transformation. But the version of his life that exists now is one that the paid-off house made available. He used the position as foundation rather than as something to protect. Same paid-off house, different orientation, different decade. Here is the identity layer that runs underneath the financial one. For most of the years you've owned the house, it has been a commitment you were inside, something you were working toward. The paid-off house was the goal, and the mortgage was the means of getting there. Your identity in relation to the house was that of someone building toward something. When the mortgage disappears, that identity doesn't automatically update. You are no longer building toward the paid-off house. You are now inside it. And being inside a completed achievement is a different psychological position than building toward one. The direction changes. Where before your identity was oriented toward the future, toward the moment of completion, now it's oriented toward preservation, toward keeping what you have, toward not losing the thing it took. Decades to achieve. You didn't just remove the debt. You created something you became afraid to lose. That fear is not irrational. Losing a paid-off house would be a significant loss. The fear is proportionate to the stakes. But proportionate fear sustained over years shapes behavior in ways that gradually narrow the range of moves available to you. It shows up before decisions, running a quick check. Does this put the house at risk? It runs in career conversations, in geographic considerations, in the evaluation of any opportunity that would require a period of financial instability. The check is fast, often unconscious, and it consistently resolves in favor of the path that keeps the house the safest. The person who is protecting an asset is making different decisions than the person who is building from one. Both are reasonable. Both have logical justifications available to them. Only one is moving. 10 years after the final payment, the person who treated the paid-off house as a gravitational center looks different from the person who treated it as a foundation. Both still own the house. Both have the asset. But the decisions made in the decade after the mortgage ended have produced different lives. The gravitational person's decade is stable, safe. The house is intact. The life is intact. The security that was supposed to be the reward for decades of payments has been achieved and maintained. But it's also a decade in which fewer risks were taken, fewer moves were made, fewer opportunities were evaluated with genuine openness. The decade looks from the outside like a successful outcome. From the inside, it can feel like a long, careful management of something that was supposed to have been finished. The foundation person's decade has more in it. More disruption, more change, more periods of uncertainty absorbed without crisis because the foundation held. The paid-off house didn't make every bet safe. It made some bets survivable. And survivable bets, taken consistently over a decade, produce a life with more shape in it than a decade of careful preservation. Both people made the same final payment. The lives that followed diverged, not at the payment, but at the question they answered about what the payment meant. The question of what owning a paid-off house means is one that doesn't get examined closely enough before the moment arrives. The cultural conversation about paying off the mortgage tends to stop at the achievement, at the final payment, the zero balance, the the concrete completion of a decades-long commitment. It doesn't tend to continue into the question of what comes next, what the position is supposed to enable, what kind of life the freed-up foundation is supposed to support. Most people arrive at the paid-off house without having asked what they plan to do with it. Not financially, life-wise. Whether it's the end of something or the beginning. Whether the achievement is itself the goal or whether it was supposed to fund something. A version of the next chapter that the mortgage made impossible and the absence of the mortgage is supposed to make available. The house is paid off. You don't owe the bank anymore. But now, you owe the life you built around the house. The life whose continuation requires that the house remain intact, whose decisions have gradually been organized around protecting the asset rather than using the position it represents. The house is paid off, and the question is what it's costing you to keep it exactly as it is. Not financially, in terms of the decisions you haven't made, the moves you haven't taken, the version of the next decade that's still waiting for you to stop managing the achievement and start building from it. Security and freedom are not the same thing. The paid-off house is security. What you do with the security, whether you let it become the center everything orbits around, or whether you use it as the ground floor for something that requires you to move, determines whether the decades of payments produced the life you were working toward. That was never a question for the mortgage to answer. It's always been yours.